Hello, I'm Dr. Thomas Maples, and welcome back to a Sacred Journey podcast. I'm very pleased that you decided to join me here today in today's podcast episode entitled The Simple Pleasures, 3 Rules for Happiness. And I hope that you'll be able to attain as much information from this podcast as I have grown in researching it and examining the specific nuances that can lead to a more happy and healthy life. Let us begin. As always, let us begin with a little citation, something that will help prime the journey towards this idea of having 3 rules for happiness. Today's quote comes from professional golfer Walter Hagen. He says, "You're only here for a short visit. Don't hurry, don't worry, and be sure to smell the flowers along the way." There are so many beautiful quotes about flowers, and I think this really carries on a tradition that I was first introduced to by the poet and author Ralph Waldo Emerson, who also said, "Many eyes go through the meadow, but few see the flowers in it." When we begin to look at what's there, when we begin to become cognizant of what's before our very eyes, what oftentimes happens is new worlds open up to us. As I began to ponder the quote from Walter Hagen, I began to ask myself, could there only be 3 rules? I don't really know the answer to this, and I don't think there really is a clear answer to this, although I've heard such acronym rules as KISS, the rule of KISS, keep it simple and stupid. I've heard other rules as a teacher when I was teaching kindergarten that you should keep your rule set to under 5 just for the ability to remember such rules. But I don't know if there can only be 3 rules, but what seems to strike out to me here is that there's a real pulling to keep things simple. Then the simpler that you keep it, the more that we may begin to adhere to it. We see tenets of this even within Christian influence when we look at the Old Testament and it gives 10 commandments by which to live, and then Jesus Christ gives 1 commandment to simplify it so that it creates a universal law, a universal rule, or what we in philosophy would call a monism. In John 13, verses 34 and 35, Jesus states, "A new command I give you, love one another as I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another." Now, in a world with love and pure love is what's being called for in that 1 commandment, we could see how other commandments such as warnings towards gluttony or warnings towards adultery or warning towards taking life is not really inclusive of a world that is bent upon love. And I think that that is part of the journey here. And so what happens as we begin to take a look at the rule set, the more that we could simplify it, I believe the better off we are. And in this commandment that he gives, we see that love is the primary driving force that is present. And what beauty exists within the symbolism behind flowers as it relates to love and expressions of love for those that we wish to express those feelings towards. I believe that's the intent also of Emerson and Hagen's rules towards happiness and being able to see the simple things, the simple aspects of beauty that sit beneath your feet. So let's begin to break this down. The first rule for happiness, don't hurry. I was first exposed to this idea as a young man when I had the opportunity to go to Florida. Coming from California, I was always amazed by the speed of life, everything passing at you at the speed of light. But really, to what end? And that's a question that I ask myself as I see people zooming past me on the freeway, going probably 100 miles per hour, when the slow lane is actually doing probably 70. That absolutely amazed me as a driver when I was traversing the highways and byways in Florida, as I reflected upon how fast life seems to move in California and how in the South it somehow is just slower. Not that one is worse than the other, but they're different. Now in California, the right lane is reserved for the slower traffic. When I was driving in the South, I began to realize that this was a different way of life, and it had me begin to reflect upon the miracle that is. You see, when we hurry, we're in a striving capacity, and author Wayne Dyer warns us about working a psychology to strive versus arrive. When we hurry, when we strive, we're actively trying to seek what's on the other side of the hill. But oftentimes, when we begin to really look at what's under our feet, we may find the actual hill that we want to be on or in. And maybe we want to nurture that hill to create even more beauty within the flowers that are present upon its slopes. Sometimes we try to conquer, we move on, we move from place to place, and we become herded at what seems like warp speed. But is this what the meaning of happiness is? As I began to think of that, I couldn't really come to grasp with it. As I reflected on where I'd been versus where I was going, the question came to my mind: where am I going? And why is it so imperative to get there in such a hurried place? Now, this may sound a little bit like existentialism because we do have a personal ontology that drives us. However, we all have the same ending point. We just have a different storyline that we begin to create and examine as we move along this beautiful journey that we call life. As I drove along the highways and byways, I began to think if the citizens of Florida could relax for a minute, couldn't I also relax and enjoy the moment? Instead of trying to conquer myself towards the destination at hand? You see, hurried nature creates tension, hypertension, and we know how dangerous that is in the United States. If you look at it from the perspective of love, it creates an inability to enjoy your happiness in the moment. Go to the next thing. Go to the next car. Go to the next woman. If you don't like your spouse, trade them in for another one. I don't know if this is the true definition of love, and I don't think anyone would necessarily agree that it is a true definition of love. And so hurried nature really stands at the antithesis of what love is, a slow transforming process that hopefully creates heat enough to mold that lump of coal that may be the soul, the soot that's there, the soot of the soul into the diamond it wishes to become. Now let's move on to rule number 2. Be happy. I love Bobby McFarlane's song in the 80s, Don't Worry, Be Happy. Especially the video that featured the late Robin Williams in it. He was such a brilliant man. Yet like many, he battled with demons maybe. He battled mental illness, and in the end, it took his life in a very public manner. This is a sad facet, a tragedy in our history, especially the history of Hollywood. However, there are many lessons that could come from this, and the fact is that a reality that is portrayed on a screen may not be the actual reality that's present. The brighter the light that is produced, the darker the shadow that's seen on the other side. Now, we know this in psychology, but a lot of it is not portrayed within the aspects of the more happier media that wants to portray things in a very controlled and vacuum-like space instead of taking a look at the soot that creates that glamour. When we engage the idea of not worrying and just be happy, we create a chasm, if you will. We create a vortex that begins to suck us into this depth of trying to negate things as being negative while amplify things that are more positive. This could be a dangerous ground because, as I stated above, it's in that aspect of working the soot of the soul, the coal of the earth, that diamonds are really found. And this is the idea behind alchemy and its effect on psychology. When we go inside, we begin to engage the inner depths of the soul to hopefully chip away at the less liked aspects of the self and really engage the shadow, the material that's there, so that we can begin to hopefully glean the light from the lessons that it presents. When we worry, just like the moments of when we're happy, it's only a temporary aspect. You see, emotions is energy in motion. And even if you find yourself unable to make sense of what's happening within as you undergo your own growing experience or your own psychological journey towards emotional health, there is help in understanding the norms and the abnorms that life affords us. And no problem is necessarily permanent unless it's made that way. What happens is a lot of times we begin to lose focus on the light as we get caught in the more shadow aspects of psychological work. However, in working the elements of that shadow, we do begin to see ways out and to push through the light to the light present. Rule number 2 reminds us not to worry. The source of anxiety, the most primary of all emotions, as it is linked to survival, is there to keep us alive. It's a measuring mechanism that helps us identify environmental cues that could possibly be dangerous. And the flip side of this emotion is the possibility of happiness. Because if the internal environment identifies safety factors, it can ease itself into finding happiness habits. This is because the body, the mind, and the spirit are allowed to ease into action that could elicit a more positive feeling state. However, to begin to ease into that perspective, it needs to feel safe within itself to let down its guard. And so psychology really begins from the aspect of working from what perspective you're at. If the body and the soul are at ease, you can begin to work yourself into the more positive feelings by looking more towards a present to future-oriented perspective. If depression or anxiety is the primary state that is present, then things have to be looked at from the past to get to that present ease, to move towards future aspects that can create happiness. Now, happiness itself can be elusive. That is its one downfall. However, its plus side is worth the journey to find ways to grasp its elusive nature. Don't worry. Let go of past hurts. They are no longer happening, so don't let them control your present moment. Don't fear a future that is yet to happen. This robs you of the moment, where your mind can possibly see a flower marker for a path that was not readily apparent just the moment before. most of all, please don't forget to follow rule number 3. But before that, if there's aspects of mental health that is present, you can see a qualified mental health practitioner to receive help. A lot of times the symptoms that are present can be worked through with a doctor, a psychiatrist, a psychologist, or a therapist to help navigate the ins and outs of our emotional landscape to make our emotions more of an ally versus a foe. And if you or anyone that you know is in crisis, you can always call or text the National Suicide Hotline at 988. Now on to rule number 3, my favorite, making sure to smell the flowers along the way. Jesus said, "Love one another." This is the most simple yet profound commandment anyone could give. What would happen to the world if each and every one of us just practiced this one principle for 1 minute, the same minute? Would that minute be filled with conflict or peace? That's one of the issues with concepts like this, because it ultimately is up to you. It does not come from an external source. It's your minute to give, and do you want to give it? You may ask, why even try? It's no use anyways. But this is an overt denial of the flower that is within your grasp. I wonder if you spent 1 moment in gratitude and loving kindness, if that moment could lead to 1 more. Maybe, maybe not. But the biggest effect of that 1 moment will be that you identified 1 way to see the flower in your grasp. That flower that may not have been present before you turned your consciousness towards its beauty. By simply being aware, you grasp that the nature of that flower exists within your hand. And maybe it was always there to begin with, not absent in the first place. I hope you found this podcast helpful. It is truly my wish to promote happiness and inner well-being on this blog. Also, thank you for listening. And as always, may blessings find you, my friends, as you plan, chart your course, and advance confidently in the direction of your dreams. Goodbye for now, and I hope you enjoyed.